1914. The world had entered war. Millions of soldiers were picking up guns. But at the same time, a different group of men was preparing for another war. This war was not against a country, it was against nature itself. Against Antarctica, the most dangerous place on Earth. At that time, Antarctica was considered the most mysterious region in the world. There were no cities, no humans, no help. Only ice, storms, and deadly cold. But there was one man who wanted to conquer this frozen hell. His name was Ernest Shackleton. He had already been to Antarctica once before. He had seen death up close. But this time his dream was even bigger. He wanted to cross the entire Antarctic continent on foot. No one had ever done that before. People said, "This is suicide." But Shackleton refused to stop. He placed an advertisement in a newspaper. Dangerous journey, low wages, bitter cold, long months of darkness, safe return, doubtful. And yet, hundreds of men volunteered to join him. Why? Because some people live for history. August 1914. Huge crowds gathered at the docks of England. People had come to see the Endurance one last time. Many crew members were hugging their families goodbye. Some people were laughing. But fear was clearly visible in the eyes of others. Because everyone knew, if Antarctica captured them, they might never return. The Endurance was built from wood, but it was incredibly strong. It had been specially designed for polar ice. Inside the ship were food supplies, medicines, dogs, lifeboats, warm clothes, cameras, everything they would need for survival. The crew included many different kinds of men: sailors, scientists, hunters, mechanics, photographers. And among them, the most famous was Frank Hurley. He was the expedition's cameraman. He had no idea that he would later show the world the real images of this horror story. As the ship slowly left the harbor, people continued waving goodbye. Some women were crying. And perhaps they didn't realize they were seeing their loved ones for the last time. As the Endurance sailed farther south, the ocean began to change. The waves grew larger. Freezing winds slammed against the ship. Many crew members became seasick. At night, the ship rocked violently. Sometimes it felt as if the entire ship would break apart at any moment. But this was only the beginning. One morning, the crew saw their first iceberg, a giant white mountain floating in the ocean. Everyone became excited. People rushed to take photographs. But Shackleton remained silent. He knew the real Antarctica had finally begun. Days passed. Now floating ice surrounded them everywhere. The ocean was slowly disappearing. The ship pushed its way through the frozen ice. Sometimes loud cracking sounds echoed around them, as if giant sheets of glass were shattering. It was the ice breaking under the pressure of the ship. But Antarctica was only giving them a warning. The real attack had not started yet. January 1915. One morning, the crew woke up and realized the ocean was gone. In every direction, there was nothing but endless white ice. The ship began slowing down. The engine was running at full power, but the Endurance could no longer move forward. Then suddenly, crack! Massive layers of ice trapped the ship. The crew rushed outside in panic. The ship could no longer move at all. They were trapped. At first, everyone believed the ice will melt in a few days. But days turned into weeks, and weeks turned into months. Now they finally understood. Antarctica had imprisoned them. Soon the long winter night of the South Pole began. For days at a time, the sun never appeared. Imagine it, 24 hours of darkness, nothing but the sound of storms and freezing winds. The crew slowly began to break mentally. Some men became angry and irritable. Others stopped talking completely. One night, a man suddenly woke up screaming. He thought something beneath the ice was pulling the ship downward. Many crew members began suffering hallucinations. But Shackleton realized something important. If a man lost mentally, then no one would survive. So he created strict rules. Every man must work. No one would stay alone. Games would be played every night. Songs would be sung together. They even played football on the ice. Imagine that. On the most dangerous continent on Earth, a group of men playing football in the snow, just to stop themselves from going insane. But the pressure of the ice kept increasing. Every night the ship made horrifying sounds. Crack! Boom! Screech! It sounded like some giant monster was slowly crushing the wooden ship. The crew could barely sleep from fear. Then one night, the entire ship suddenly shook violently. Walls began breaking apart. A sailor screamed, "Water coming in!" Every man grabbed buckets and rushed forward. They began throwing freezing water back outside. But the water kept rising. Now everyone understood. The Endurance was dying. October 27th, 1915. Shackleton gathered the entire crew together. For a few seconds, he said nothing. Then finally he spoke. "Abandon ship." The entire atmosphere fell silent. Some men began crying, because for months that ship had been their home. Now the crew began removing only the essential supplies. Everything else was left behind. Books, furniture, personal memories. Frank Hurley tried desperately to save the cameras. He had taken thousands of photographs, but the weight was too much. He was forced to leave many precious photos behind in the ice. Then, slowly, the Endurance began sinking deeper into the frozen ice. The crew stood at a distance and watched. No one said a word. It felt as if they were watching a friend die. Now they were officially homeless. Beneath them was nothing but floating ice. Imagine it. A frozen sheet drifting on top of the ocean. That could crack apart at any moment. They set up tents, but Antarctica showed them no mercy. At night, violent storms arrived, and the tents nearly blew away in the wind. Many times men had to wake up in the middle of the night just to hold the ropes down. Their sleeping bags had frozen solid. Ice covered their clothes. In the mornings, icicles hung from many of the men's beards. Food was slowly running out. Soon they were forced to hunt seals and penguins. For the first time in their lives, many men ate raw meat. Some of them cried, but survival forces people to do anything. January 1916, one night, a terrifying sound echoed across the ice. Crack! The entire ice sheet began breaking apart. Men rushed outside in panic. Below them, black, freezing ocean water became visible. If they fell into it, death would come within minutes. Staying there was no longer possible. Shackleton shouted, "Prepare the boats!" All 3 lifeboats were lowered onto the ice. But there was one huge problem. The boats were tiny, and ahead of them lay the Southern Ocean, one of the most dangerous oceans on Earth. But they had no other choice.
The men climbed into the lifeboats and sailed into Antarctica's freezing sea. Waves rose like mountains. The tiny boats were thrown violently up and down. With every wave, freezing water poured inside. Several men constantly threw water back out of the boats. If too much water filled the boats, everything would be over. Nighttime was the most terrifying. Pitch black darkness, freezing winds, and giant waves. One man wrote in his diary, "It felt as though the sea wanted to swallow us alive." Some sailors' hands had stopped working completely. Their fingers had turned blue from frostbite. After days of a journey that felt like death, they finally saw land in the distance. "Land!" everyone screamed. It was Elephant Island. The island was almost completely isolated from humanity, but for the first time in months, they stood on solid ground. Some men touched the earth and cried, but the happiness did not last long. Shackleton knew, if help doesn't come, we will die here, because there was no human settlement, no ship route, no rescue. They were completely cut off from the world. Then Shackleton made the most dangerous decision of all. He would go for help himself. But how? In nothing more than a small lifeboat. The destination, South Georgia Island. The distance, 1,300 kilometers, across one of the most dangerous oceans on Earth. Many men said, "This is impossible," but there was no other option. They chose the strongest boat. Its name was James Caird. The boat was so small that giant waves could swallow it at any moment. Shackleton selected only 5 men to go with him. The others were left behind on Elephant Island. When the boat finally departed, the men standing behind remained silent because everyone knew this might be the last time they would ever see Shackleton alive. Now began one of the most dangerous boat journeys in history. The Southern Ocean attacked immediately. 50-foot waves, freezing storms. Many times the entire boat disappeared beneath the water, then suddenly rose back above the waves again. The men were constantly soaked. Ice formed on their clothes. Many of them could barely sleep, because if someone slept too long, he might never wake up again. One night, a massive wave struck the boat, and it almost flipped over completely. Everyone thought, this is the end. But somehow, the boat survived. Throughout the journey, Shackleton kept motivating his crew. He slept less than anyone else, because he understood something important. If hope died, the men would die too.
After 16 days, they finally saw mountains in the distance. South Georgia. They had survived. But only halfway, because they had landed on the wrong side of the island. Civilization was on the opposite side, and between them stood giant glaciers, frozen mountains, deadly cliffs. No human being had ever crossed that route before. But they had no choice. Now Shackleton and 2 other men began crossing the mountains on foot. They had no map, no rope, no proper climbing gear, only survival instinct. They climbed frozen mountains. The wind was so strong, a man could be blown off the cliffs. In many places, deep ravines stretched thousands of feet below them. One wrong step, and death was certain. They kept moving non-stop, because if they stopped, their bodies would freeze. After nearly 36 hours without rest, they finally saw a small whaling station in the distance. Civilization. For the first time in months, they heard human voices again. The station workers were shocked. The man standing before them looked less like humans and more like ghosts. Long beards, torn clothes, swollen eyes, and ice covering their bodies. But Shackleton could think of only one thing. My men are still trapped there. Immediately, he began organizing rescue missions. But Antarctica blocked every attempt. The first rescue failed. The second failed. The third failed too. Every single time, thick ice forced the rescue ships back. Meanwhile, the men trapped on Elephant Island were slowly losing hope. Some of them stared at the horizon every day, but all they could see was endless ice. Then, August 1916, a ship appeared in the distance. At first, nobody believed it. Then, suddenly, everyone started screaming. "Ship!" Men began running. Some broke down crying. Shackleton had returned. The very first thing he asked was, "Are all men alive?" The answer came, "Yes, all alive." At that moment, history was made. Ending. 2 years, deadly cold, a ship crushed by ice, hunger, madness, the ocean, and endless darkness. And yet, all 27 men returned alive from Antarctica. Even today, the world remembers the story not simply as survival, but as one of the greatest victories of human courage ever witnessed. And somewhere beneath Antarctica's frozen ice, perhaps the voice of the endurance still echoes today.